in Momentum Year. So his role in this is Dr. Denley brought this to our USG system, and it's Mr. Hull's job to, he said, I said, what is your role? And he really has a pivotal role in this. He does communication, implementation, outreach, and assessment for Momentum Year. So that's a pretty big picture and a role to fill. He has been at USG for 5 years, and I always try to find out something interesting about a speaker. And the interesting thing is Mr. Hull was a former Peace Corps volunteer. He served two-year terms, one in Tanzania and one in the western part of Uganda. So that's I thought that was a really interesting fact about him. So without, and our president may come, and I will acknowledge Dr. Dozier if she does come in, but I want to get this started and have you find out about academic mindset. When I was asking Mr. Hull about it, and I said, what is this? He sent me a book. And I appreciate it, and I recently, and he'll probably show you the book, I recently bought it for all the directors and faculty in the College of Education, just to learn about academic mindset, so we could talk about it and be all on the same page about what we're trying to do with our students' mindset and Momentum Year.
Well, thank you. Is this my gift? A phone?
If you want it, then you can answer all my questions.
I'm just going to wipe it. I promise you that. So, thank you all for having me. Thank you, Mary, for inviting me out. You know, I would have given you all a book, but it just may be a little more efficient. And when Heather comes back in the room, I'll make sure to introduce her. And I'm doing that for two reasons. One is she's a critical part of this rollout as well. Our titles don't reflect anything of that, but it is true that she's critical to the idea of communications and implementation. Also, and I had this unfortunate experience yesterday where I was speaking at a campus and she was at the board meeting and therefore wasn't there. And when you get me in without her, you're really getting the sidekick without the superhero. And it's not where I want to start. So I'm not going to assume that everyone knows a lot about the Momentum Year, but I'm hoping you've heard a little bit about it. And this is essentially what the Momentum Year includes. So for those of you for whom this is a review, here's a picture of brownies. We have told you there's a lunch that you have to go for a walk for. So the Momentum Year is essentially a way of focusing our thoughts around our students' success. It includes having them come in with a purposeful choice. In other words, they start out their academic careers knowing why they're here, why they're studying what they're studying. That if they don't know, we help them get there. And the way we do that is through basically not saying, well, go ahead and just choose any old major. We're going to help them shape what they want to study so that it's a little clear. And that's the idea of focus areas. Once I'm going to skip down a bit. Once they've chosen their what they want to say, once they have their purpose, we want them to attempt the first 30 hours of a clear pathway. We want them to do that their first year. We want them to have a clear path to their graduation. We want them to have, within that clear pathway, 3 courses that fit what they think they're studying for. These are not upper-level courses. These are simply courses that align with the path that you would take if you're a business major, and it may feel different than if you're a health major. We want them to take their English and math in their first year. That's critically important coursework because we know that's at the center of all study. And finally, and this idea is that we want them to create a productive academic mindset. And that's what I want to talk to you a bit about today. This is actually the thing that's gotten the most interest and excitement about campuses. So first, before I even go further on that, we're going to do a quick exercise. So there's some note cards on your table. You can grab a note card. And I want you to just think about, we're going to take about 5 minutes to do this. I want you to think about 2 or 3 major challenges that routinely face your students. Just any challenge. Just think of 2 or 3 that you face. If you're a student, think about your peers, the peers you're working with. Second, I want you to think about the effects of these challenges on your students. I want you to think about the effects of challenges on your students. And so I want you to think about 2 minutes just to sketch those out really quickly. They should be the first things that come to mind. And then you're going to share them with some people at your table. So we're going to just have a bit of conversation. Okay, so as you finish up, turn to pair opportunity. We're gonna do this as sort of a little pairing, and share out with somebody else at your table. If there's 5 of you, groups of 3, groups of 2, just sort of talk about what they are. I want to sort of have we're going to try and get a sort of table, a couple of table report outs, and sort of what are those key challenges, and how do they, what effect do they have on your students? So if you can, now we can talk. So go ahead and turn to your neighbors and share what you see, and also how that affects you. One of the risks of this exercise is we can sort of spin it out into a whole afternoon event. You know, I really want to get a quick temperature scan. Get a handful. So, who's got an August birthday? Oh, you know this trick. Dang it! Oh, you got an August birthday. So, report back. What sort of challenges did you hear from your partner and from you? Do you mind?
Oh, sure.
You knew you were volunteering when you said August birthday, right? I mean,
of course, financial stress, first generation students, especially coming freshmen, have a hard time transitioning, trying to find themselves, purpose, in the direction.
okay. Another? You were writing good notes. What do you?
So we have a few of them I can compile from the other table. So math and English is a challenge for our students, especially simple stuff like algebra.
Simple stuff like algebra.
Time management, because most of our students are professional students and they work on time. So and then inability to complete any essay type questions, because most of them are tested under multiple choice environment. So when you give them an essay type question, it's very difficult. Financial aid was one of the other important reasons on our table. And high school from which they come in, they don't have books here. So coming to college and then being able to purchase those books is a completely different kind of expectation.
So sort of, I mean, in a sense, too, there's sort of a cultural expectation that you've got to buy the book, you don't have to plan it. And I'm familiar. Can I get another 1 or 2? Yes, sir.
One challenge was working outside the class and coming to class at the same time. Like sometimes work more than half time. And then background in high school, the level was raised. I think it's time to bring them back to the lower grade requirements.
Okay. Okay. One more. Anybody else want to report back out?
One thing I kind of focus more on the students and what they bring to the class. And I just see, when I talk to a lot of them, they don't have this sense of, like a locus of control. Everything falls outside of their control sometimes. But even when things are under their control. So I think because I've read about academic mindset, and so that's a fixed mindset. They just think all these things happen to them, and then that's the reason. They can't work through how to get around it, or it's an excuse maybe sometimes, or they just don't know how to be responsible or be a college student, or like I like to think of them to become a young scholar. So that locus of control, they don't feel they have control over their academics, maybe their life, their destiny. It all happens to them.
Okay. Before we move on, any final, yes, ma'am.
I'm going to put out, and just because we had kind of a very good representation of our table, we had TRIO, we have an instructor from the library, who's a librarian, we have Office of Provost and also Director of Sports Research. And it was funny that we agreed upon probably 3 of those challenges that they face. We're talking about the transition and the transformation. the processes we talked about, and they don't know what college is all about. And that they might have one mindset, but they think it's something, and when they get here, it's something totally different. So it's the adjustment, even from pedagogy to andragogy, making that transformation and making it so that it's smooth. It's always financial, you know, when you don't have money, it's just always a hard thing, no matter who you are. You know, student, instructor, director, whoever it might be, it's financial. But the other thing is that when we communicate with our students, are we sending a clear message? Are we sending a consistent message? And are we saying the same thing? So the emphasis is there. So those were the kind of things that we looked at.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for that. No, yes, sir.
Well, we were discussing a lot of anxiety about discovering their own agency, which does map on to what you were saying. Some of our students don't know what it takes to get from point A to point B. One of the speeches I do in my critical thinking class, I actually do a profession speech. What does it take to get from, if you're going to major here, what are your goals and how do you get here concretely? And then some of the students come back after this assignment and they say, I didn't know being a lawyer required 7 years of school, right? So, and another thing we also talked about were financial challenges. Particularly in first year courses, students often don't have the book at all, right? Unlike me who went to freshman and my parents, I got my loans and I bought my books, and then my dad said read the first chapter of every book before I actually got into school, right? And my dad was telling me how to be at a public state university in Pennsylvania. Well, he went to Notre Dame, so he was giving me upper standards and, you know. And then I also contributed that students often don't know how to interpret a text and encounter a text and interpret it in the way that typically I, coming from high school, and my other graduates did. So that basic textual exegesis in first year courses is a really hard skill set to teach. And I'm coming from the humanities, so that's a concern for us.
Yes, well, I'll tell you, we discussed a very similar issues, but one thing that we wanted to add is that the environmental issues, the academic mindset is very important because we live in Savannah, which there's hurricanes. The juniors coming in, they have experienced evacuation 2 years in a row, and so we have to think about that as we have considered the academic mindset, the environmental issues, even with safety or their environment. They're coming from different areas and they're coming to Savannah. We have to consider the environmental issues in reference to their academic mindset.
I've done this a couple of times. That's the first time that's come up, but that's actually really critical. The idea being that there's specific geographic stressors and anxieties that would not necessarily be true in the mountains or something. Are there other, novel? Yes, ma'am.
We were talking about the fact that a lot of times I see a strong disconnect between the theoretical framework approach that we want faculty to espouse to students and the Du Boisian frame that a school like Savannah State comes from. And the two are sometimes disconnected. And I think that we could start thinking about marrying the fact that the two have to coexist in order for the student to get the kind of well-rounded education that we want students to get. And I think that us thinking about it from those frames, especially at Savannah State, would really help us to meet that goal with the momentum mindset. So
Great. Unless there's something really burning, I want to stop on that one because that's actually kind of leads into something that you're going to do in just a second. But so the challenges you've listed have some sort of coalescence. There's a lot about scarcity. There's a lot about time scarcity, financial scarcity, attention scarcity. There's a lot about anxiety and belonging. The idea of how does a system operate? This idea that how do I manage and structure myself in order to fit into this new structure? There's some issues around self-efficacy and some self-advocacy. One of the things I thought was really interesting, the idea that the idea of not learning it, or not having the background, or not having the foundation skills, has a great deal to do with something that feeds into this, is that if we are looking at a student's academic mindset, there's a connection that really has to be critically made about how they can do something different if what they're doing is not working currently. So, to talk about learning mindsets, just very briefly, so we all are on the same page. Learning mindsets is beliefs and perceptions about learning that shape how we interpret difficulty. So it's not just the way we think, but it's how we view what we're doing. It's an action. It's an active type of thinking rather than simply a passive type of thinking. When we talk about a mindset, it could be, your mindsets may be anything, but we're specifically looking at how they do academically, and that's an issue about how they interpret difficulty. So, now how we perceive this is really important. So, the same situation, there's a study, this is Stevens Towns, and this is a study that was done at a fairly large school. They had a group of students come in. Half of them were first generation, half of them were not. They did not have enough ends to segregate far below that. And they handed them 2 letters. So they were told they were coming in for an experiment about stress, and they were. And they were handed 2 letters, one from the president of the university. The first one said, you're here, you're welcome to college. You're here to get an education. We're here to support your academic success, and here's what it looks like. You're here to express your ideas. You're here to create your own intellectual journey. You're here to participate in independent research, which is standard language from a lot of learn about pursuing your own interests. Very standard language from the university. The other half was handed a similar letter, but it was slightly different. It said, welcome to this institution. We're supporting we value and support you. We want you to learn to be part of this community and learn together. We want you to connect with your fellow students. We want you to connect with your faculty. We want you to engage in collaborative research. We want you to work together to learn from all. So those are 2 different messages that get to the same point. One is an independent message, and the independent message is essentially normalized in our colleges, right? That's the way we have traditionally generated our communications to students. The other one is very interdependent. And they were wondering, the investigation was really wondering, does it matter? Does it matter if a student is addressed in an independent way? Because one of the things we know is that for first generation students who come from backgrounds that are not customarily engaged in college, they tend to also come from interdependent communities. So if you think about a scarcity condition, students living in scarcity, students who have lower income, oftentimes have not had the choices that an upper middle class student has. So if you think about an upper middle class student, they get to choose music lessons or sports, music lessons and sports, they get to do enrichment. That's not always an option. You oftentimes don't have choices. And again, the value that we communicate to young people as they come through their growth is that choosing your own path is really important to the upper and middle class students, but students who are finance constrained, contributing and supporting and being willing to come along is a value. So these are some different values. And what they did was they would have them at the end of this reading these 2 essays, stand up and make a speech, which is a terrifying event for any student, right? It's an anxiety-inducing thing. So they knew they were going to get a cortisol response. They swabbed their cheeks. But the students who got the independent message, the message that you're here to find your path, the first generation students that are on the left, their cortisol levels were way up from baseline. For students for whom they were continuing generation students, who would assume would have a much better facility to sort of sort through the independent message, it actually reduced it. Kind of goes over the line, the spread goes over the line, but there's an indication that it did not affect their stress level. But when we look at the interdependency, the idea that we're here to collaborate, the way we communicate this message, not only flipped the script on these students, but it actually reduced their likelihood. It reduced them below where the independent students, the continuing generation students' stress levels have been. So that idea is essentially, and in this article they have this thing, so the idea is that the way we structure college and the way we interact with our students can directly affect their outcomes. The study has this great quote at the very beginning, and basically asks, why does it have to be so hard? Like when I went to a TA, they said, well, we really want you, this is a great message, I've done this message. I want you to find your path. I want you to figure out what you want to work on. I'm not going to tell you what I want you to write. I want you to which is great if you're accustomed to that. But if you're not accustomed to that, it's paralyzing. Because really, I'm having to figure out everything else about this college. I'm having to figure out, and like you said, they don't understand what this system is like. We all recognize that. So that's sort of, I want to give that as a sort of a starting salve. That different people will have different responses to the same material we give. And this all feeds back into the mindset work. As Mary noted, we've been doing this for about a year now, and we're sort of trying to figure out the path forward. I want to note this because we have a roadmap to where we want to get to. We are essentially, we're somewhere in between here and here. And I'm saying that because I want to beg for patience here a bit, insofar as we're not at the point where we want to do wholesale interventions that we want to do. I understand there's a lot that's going on campus. If that's true and they work, we'd love to know about it. Because right now we're doing this idea of learning about our students and synthesizing and planning. And we're learning about our students, those of you who work with first-year students. We're doing a mindset survey. I understand y'all are presenting it into the first-year experience course, which is awesome. Right now, the league leader in response rates is Albany State. They've got like 679 out of 1,700 students. So the mark is there, and I have every confidence it will get in. But the mindset survey is a fairly large survey of academic mindset around a couple of key issues that we feel we can focus on. I'm going to get to those in a bit, and it allows us to look at students at the individual level and also track them over time, so we can see if their mindsets affect their academic progress. Which we think the answer is yes. Before we can get there, we want to know where are we, where do they sit, and are there distinct differences among institutions, among communities, among student types. So that's where we are. And the reason I say that is because there's a concern that we have that we just need to do something. And I've unfortunately seen this more often than not, where we just have to do something. And I don't think Savannah's in that position. It sounds like this, and from what I've heard and seen, it's a great deal more thoughtful about how it's been done. But the idea we have to do something. We have to do anything for our students. So we wind up doing a whole lot of stuff. And I'm guilty of this because I work for Complete College Georgia. And frankly, we do all these things and more. And we think, oh, one of these is going to stick, right? And it ends up being much more confused. They all overlap. They get confused. There's no consistency. Somebody mentioned this, that we're not really consistent about what we do. Is it your table? Somebody mentioned consistency. I think it's true. So what we're trying to do with the mindset work is really harness the power of system-wide change. We're going to put students at the center. The students. We put student S at the center of this. The student S is going to be surrounded by instructors. The instructor S. I love it when they do this. So instructor S will be surrounding our students as the first point of contact. But that's really important. The students are critically affected by their interaction with faculty and also curriculum. It worked on my screen, folks. But no, because curriculum is really critically important too, right? So we have this overlap of the who teaches and what we teach. And I actually heard that in some of your comments about we don't always connect as we think, this Du Boisian frame. There you go, right there. Is the idea that we don't overlap with everything we do. It sometimes comes in differently, so we should expect outcomes that are perhaps not what we intended if we don't get all the systems in place. But it doesn't stop there. You also have this critical role for advisors. So in the last 5-6 years, what we've seen is a huge growth in this role on campuses, right? That there's now another person who is responsible and who has the accountability to address students and student needs. And they have a much greater role with affecting these students, particularly students who are unfamiliar with college. These are now becoming much more your orienters for college, your orienteers, your navigators. Kind of hesitant to use the word, but that's really true. They are helping your students figure out this pathway through. Your administration, your friends and family are all part of the support structure. And actually, I actually need to flip this because I kind of feel like, particularly with students who, and we've looked at the data particularly for students who are first generation, whose parents may question the value of college in general. Pulling family and friends into this mix is critically important. And then there's people like me, and there's people like the folks at Motivate Lab, who are our research partners, who surround all this with research and data. So when we look at mindset, there's a whole bunch of them. And so I'm betting that in a round robin we come up with a whole bunch. There's Duckworth's work on grit, the idea that if you can persevere through a crisis. There's Carol Dweck's work, which is the book I sent, Mindset, which is actually growth and fixed mindset. We just stole the whole term for what we talk about, but it's the idea of growth and fixed mindset, that you can learn something, or you say you can't learn something. There's self-efficacy, self-advocacy, but we really want to narrow down to what we think we can affect. And so what we've done with our partners at University of Virginia, I've really gone back into the research and looked at where we think interventions can have a positive impact on students. And so we think about it as growth, as mindset GPS. And it's a cute little phrase, which I'm uncomfortable using because I hate cute little phrases, but it's really helpful to get people to understand what we're looking at. So this young woman is thinking about three things. She's starting over, do I have what it takes? Why should I learn this? And do I belong here? So these are actually echoed, these are echoed with the exception of the scarcity components, in some of the comments you had. And essentially, you have a growth mindset, you have a purpose and value conversation, and you have a social belonging. These are sort of the big three pillars that we feel that we can have inflection points within the structures that we have. Some of the financial and scarcity things we can wrap around and support. But we'll always have time constraints for our students. We'll always have financial constraints for our students. And to the extent we can change some of our other patterns, can support those. So digging a little more deeply. So self-efficacy, grit, resilience, they matter, and they're malleable. But self-efficacy, grit, and resilience matter. But these are the ones we feel are malleable, that you can fix and adjust. Start out with growth mindset. So do I have what it takes? What does that mean? So this is actually one that most people are kind of familiar with. It's very self-helpy. You can do it if you try. Students can feel successful if they know that they can learn something new. So I usually back this one in by asking for a show of hands, who's a math person in the room? Anybody a math person? There's got to be a few math instructors in the room. No math people? Who's not a math person? Okay. I don't believe you. You've told yourself that. How long have you told yourself you're not a math person?
34 years.
34 years. And you know what? You've been right for 34 years. But the idea being that you're not a math person unless you tell yourself you're not a math person is only true in certain. And we're going to get to this. But the idea that you can change your brain, you can change the way, you can change what you can learn. We actually asked in the mindset survey questions around English and math. We asked our students two questions. One, you can learn things but you can't learn math. And one, you can learn things you can't learn English. Looking at these numbers, it is unsurprising that students who say you can learn things but you can't learn new math don't learn new math. Their grades are statistically significantly lower at the end of term one in math. And the same thing is true with English to a less significant extent. So it's a big takeaway, and we've had a lot of traction on this, but here's the thing. It's not enough to believe. So if I believe I can learn math and I study hard and I get a C or a D, and I go back and I do the same thing again, I study hard, I read my notes or whatever it is, what's my likelihood of actually doing well?
Well, it depends on the power of intention, too.
But if I'm reading my notes, I was really trying hard,
Right.
and I just go back and look at my notes again, it's unlikely. Nobody wanted to tell me this, right? Nobody in the room wanted to tell me you were willing to give me a boost, but I'm sorry, I'm not going to do very well. It's unlikely going to do very well because it's behavior. So if you think you can succeed, the other side of this is there has to be strategies attached to it. You have to do something different. So believing harder is not necessarily the answer. Believing and connecting it to an action is really how we see our students grow. And there's actually evidence on this. So these are an essay. These are students were asked to write an essay. Just now.
I wanted to give, so when I approached that last slide that you had with my students, my freshman students, I used the idea of weight loss. And I give the example of, I have a huge desire to lose weight. However, if I continue to eat the way that I eat every day, it doesn't make a difference.
Right.
They seem to get that right away.
Yeah, I have we got a text last night from my wife's organizing something for one of her grad students, and she said, do you know if he has any dietary restrictions? She asked another student, and he said, well, I think he's supposed to avoid sugar, but I've never actually seen him do it. And that's it. exactly, like, knowing it or believing it does not, however, make it true. And I think of the Music Man, the think method of music. I mean, it worked in the show, but it's not going to work in real life. So Stephanie Warmington, she's actually one of our partners at Virginia, did a research project with students, and it's essentially this idea of like asking them to write an essay. They would read an article, and one was to write an essay responding to it, the other one just wrote an essay. So, and then the final course grade, this is like sort of, they give it's the Grow Your Brain research, and they give the essay. It's a fairly well-known bit of research. And one group was asked to just write an essay without any direction, and the other one was just said to summarize. So the summarize is actually the control group. And the summarize is simply says what's in the article. So this is the traditional control. The other one is write an essay about how this works. So the group was, and then they did a textual analysis of it. The textual analysis split it into three groups. One that had the beliefs, one that had the behaviors, and then one that did both. So students said, you can learn it and you should do something new would be in that baby blue column. If you say you got to do something new every time, you just got to try it differently, you got to try a different exercise, you got to try a different experiment. It's the dark blue. The orange is that you just got to, if you believe, it will work. And it's clear that actually believing or not including anything else, sorry, the orange is they don't have any growth mindset. They didn't mention growth mindset, they skipped it. So if you believe alone, you're actually doing worse than if you simply summarized it. Because believing actually can put you in a trap. Because it can lead to discouragement. I thought I could and now I can't. So the logic of this is that if you put belief and behavior together, students begin to internalize it and begin to actually, that changes their behavior. And changing behavior, and this is something that anybody who's dealt with a toddler or a young child knows, that changing behavior is the name of the game. Believing that they want to be good is not really enough. Actually having the child be good is really where we want to get them.
What happens if you don't care about the outcome and you believe you're going to succeed, your chances are going to be higher because you're not caring about the outcome, such you're not so scared about the outcome.
Sure, so risk aversion versus risk tolerance, right? Possibly true. We don't, but again, I don't know that we want to have a lot of students in courses where they don't really care what the outcome is.
Right? They do care, but what I'm saying is that if they put all the efforts into it without, worrying about what the outcome is, and if you really put the effort from the bottom of your heart and you're really doing the work that is needed, the outcome is naturally going to be
Oh, I see
good.
what you're saying.
But on the other hand, if you're putting all the efforts and saying, oh, what happened to you?
Yeah.
Then while you're doing it, you're going to be really confused too.
Right.
So if they go, just like if you're going and playing a tennis match, right? If you go in there, man, I gotta win this one. So most probably, although you're a great tennis player, but you have that at the back of your mind, and you're gonna mess it up.
So performance anxiety around the
That's
idea
it.
of intensity, and that's arguably true as well. We have some of that. We see a lot of that with first generation students actually who come in with a great deal on their shoulders as well. Like I must succeed for more than me. And there's a degree to which that's an issue that does need to be managed. That's a good point. So purpose and value is the idea of why. Why is a student doing this? This is actually we start with this with our momentum stuff. It's like it's the idea that they know why they're learning it, that they find it to be relevant, they find it to have some meaning for them, and also they can connect it to something that is of use. So purpose and value is actually something that, again, we talk about when we talk about connecting students with the career, with their interests, and how to do that is a critically important function of how we transition students into college, because again, the normal is that we're asking them to find it themselves, but for a lot of our first generation students, that's not part of what they're normed to do. They're culturally adapted to something else. So importantly, students value school for different reasons. They come here for a job, they come here because they want to learn, they come here for, we go through all these, because they want to have a good time, they come here because it's fun. So connecting to that is actually a useful utility for us. Because we have to understand that not all of our students, even in the same classroom, are going to be there for the same reasons. And some of them haven't established and landed on a purpose yet. And finally, it says purpose and value. It's actually social belonging. Social belonging, do I belong here? So this is actually critical. We've actually seen a lot of research on this. This is probably where the longest string of research comes out. Connection with peers, connection with others on campus, that they know and feel known by somebody, that this is where they belong. Sort of the idea when we go back to that, why does it have to be so hard question of, did you have to make it this hard? Do I really have what it takes to be here? And social belonging can be a very powerful, potent magnet for the school, but it can also be a barrier for students. So you're pardon me for this cute little thing. So you have these connections to peers. They all have these senses of belonging to the school, and it simply draws them down. I'm really glad that worked, because I was afraid that was going to happen. But equally, you have these students who are struggling with their fears and their stigma, their worries. Well, I don't belong here. I'm not the same as everybody else. And we ask a lot of students this question about whether or not in the mindset, how they feel connected to their peers, do they feel like they belong? Is this an important part of their identity? And those things all put in a barrier that they're behind. And unfortunately, they carry them with them, and it keeps them away from the institution. So there's a very powerful, I'm going to skip through, I want to go through these. So there's a very powerful intervention that was done. Again, it was a fairly small N, but these researchers had students read quotes from other students who succeeded. So it's basically this peer idea. And then they wrote a brief essay about it. So they wrote these, they wrote about it, and the idea of writing the essay, so you read the piece, and you write an essay by putting it into your own words. It's just thinking, saying it is believing it. Actually, by internalizing it, you end up internalizing the message. The study was done. It was, I think this is Harvard, so it's a little bit, it's a little dicey in terms of how connected this may be. But the outcomes are pretty amazing. So this is a randomly controlled trial, so it's not, it was just whoever was in it. They had the African American students who were in the control group were actually accidentally slightly higher on GPA their first term than the ones who were not. But you can see over time that by hearing these messages about belonging, like I struggled, I did these things, and now I feel like I'm here, has an upward trajectory that's persistent. And part of that makes good sense when we start to think about the social life cycle of students. They start out in their freshman year fairly equal in their uncertainty. And the sense to which they develop belonging becomes self-reinforcing. If you feel you don't belong, and you take steps that make you not belong, you don't go engage with your peers, you don't go engage with faculty, you don't find resources and clubs on campus, you will continue to have this downward trend, and the impact of having no connection on campus is also fairly well established, that engagement with campus improves academic outcomes. It has a positive impact on the way our students behave in the classroom. So, and it becomes self-reinforcing, which is one of the powers of small interventions, and a lot of these mindsets happen this way. So thinking about that, belonging becomes critically important. And this is a group of mostly faculty, I think. So if you deal with students, one of the things we can say is like, what are the messages we send? So I'm terrible for this. I've been when I give feedback to my students, it doesn't look quite like this, but I would be discouraged. It's a lot of red, right? I mean, it feels like they just broke out the red pens. They went out at the beginning. And for a student whose experience in high school and possibly elsewhere has been policed or corrected, the idea of getting a significant amount of feedback like this is probably not helpful, because the message is possibly, you ain't got it. You're not going to manage this. Now, that is not to say you should not correct students' work. It's absolutely not to say don't correct their work, let it go, because that is not the case. They're not going to develop anything, and that's not the job here. But it's not just what we say. It's how we say it. So
what happened if the corrections are divided into giving the whole document and looking at all these red things, just giving the segmentation, and they receive a small segment of that's not bad, and they get another one. But all of a sudden, they're not seeing all these big reds coming. So
sure, I don't know, because research hasn't been done on segmented research, on segmented feedback. It might be possible, but you'd also have to be willing to take the risk that they would be willing to. So
talking about the mindset, because we talk about the mindset in the beginning.
Yep.
So if I were your student and I was sitting there and said, oh man, I really bet you had that. And
So,
But if I were getting small assignments, I'm not saying whole, this complete assignment. If the assignment is divided into different pieces, perhaps I would be able to run them and then later on when I run all the pieces together, then give me a bigger idea. Now I know exactly where I'm making mistakes in the small pieces. Now I can put bigger articles together, perhaps with a little bit lesser mistakes than what I did.
yeah, worth a try, certainly worth a try. So this exercise comes from a thing called wise feedback. So for half of the students, they were getting this sort of feedback. They got a post-it note clip to paper clip to the top that said, "I'm giving you this feedback because I have high standards for you, and I know you can run this material." They got an affirming message. So on top of the first thing you see is something big, bold that says, "I know you can do this." The other half of the students actually got a feedback to make the control equal, saying, "I'm giving you these feedbacks so you can edit your paper," or something to that effect. Basically, I'm giving you corrections so you have something to work on. So basically the same degree of intensity in terms of what they're getting, but a message on top that says, "I have high expectations for you," versus "you need some correction." So this was done in 7th grade. I should have noted that at the beginning. These were done for younger students who are still developmentally able, but this is still, there's some evidence to show this goes forward all the way through. And this is the number of students. So they were invited after they did this to resubmit the essay. Students who got the "I have high standards, but you can meet them," 72% submitted their essays again. Only 12% submitted it if they just got corrections saying, "I think you can do that. This is what you got wrong." So that's a powerful, because of what you want them to do exactly. You want them to revise and
Exactly that's what
resubmit.
I do. I teach electrical circuits, so I don't give them a problem, a big one. First I start with a small one, then I take to the next one. Then eventually, when they have mastered all these smaller steps, then I go, that's my thought.
And it applies, well, no, but it applies in different fields in different ways. I mean, so for a,
I don't know.
so the interesting thing about this, though, is that, so this was 7th grade. In high school, so now 6 years later, the group who had this intervention in 7th grade, 77%, they passed 77% of their classes. The control group passed 57%. So the 27 percentage point difference, which the indication of this is it's across the curriculum, because obviously it's hitting more classes than just writing classes, and it's hitting vertically across their academic career. It's a persistent intervention. And the idea being that the small intervention that happens early on in their academic career has an outsized effect going down throughout their academic career. So there's some logic about how these work, and I want to be clear on this. One, they normalize concern. So in other words, "I don't belong here" becomes something that everyone understands is okay. That I have questions about the value of this is something you can begin to investigate. That struggles, and that people overcome their struggles. Oh, look at that. Uh-oh, where's slide 71? We're not sure where this is going now. Hang on, I'm back to it. I'm, by the way, not speaking on 71 slides. I may not be speaking on any more slides than this. Maybe it, guys. You may just have seen the end. There we go. By the way, little tip, don't hit the end button. It's right above the next button. So these interventions crack open what is difficult, right? So telling somebody what's difficult is important, and it helps students define for them where their struggles are shared. This is a powerful thing. You'll see this a lot in these experiments, and I encourage you can actually do this in class somewhat. That students putting this in their own words. We actually asked, this is something that is good pedagogy too, just putting it in your own words, doing this for yourself, sharing it out with your team, with your peers, is useful. And it's so in some of these exercises, the most famous one is where they write a letter. You'll have them come in, freshmen will come in. They'll see this sort of the brain is a muscle. You can improve it by exercise and all this. And then they write a letter to a young student. They specify that you write it to a young student, telling them this to help them, become a better student. they don't realize, the student writing that letter doesn't realize that they're actually the one that's being affected. Because by writing this down, you are positively affecting your own self. And it also means that they're going to put it in personal words. They're going to be able to personalize it for themselves. And it gives students voice. It gives them that agency, which we oftentimes feel they don't have. And oftentimes students struggle to find their agency. And finally, particularly with the wise feedback, it builds trust, right? We lack, if the student feels that your feedback is done from a position where they have belief in, you have belief in them, they will trust you. I'm looking at I think a student up front, and so they do actually trust you. But that's the thing, it's like, we tell students they don't belong. We tell students we don't trust you to get this right. So this is some more wide feedback. So instead of saying, this is what they said, I'm giving you try this, I have high standards, you can meet them. Again! Again! No, because it went to 71. You're getting a preview at the end time for us. So, let me use this now. Instead of I'm giving you this important for you to learn, this is actually, that was the control feedback. I'm giving you this because it's important for you to learn, which I'm actually thinking I may have actually done at some point with the student I have frustrations with, like, you know what, I just need you to learn. Now that I'm in this work, I'm feeling like I was probably a terrible person. But the other idea is like, this is challenging. Like, acknowledge the challenge. And this does two things. For students for whom it's not a challenge, for those students who are ready and able to move on, it actually affirms their ability to help their peers, which we should never underestimate, the ability of a peer to help another peer. But also it helps those students who are struggling to understand this will be temporary. And all this builds together to build trust. When we block out those sort of transactional conversations we have with their students, it builds trust.
Do we have to use the word challenging here?
No, you can do whatever you feel is appropriate. Acknowledge that there's difficulty, I think, is the idea. And being cognizant of the fact that, particularly as your students come in, that there are some challenges and difficulties inherent in that. I realize I'm coming up on time. And I've only got, 30 slides to go. So there are some practical tips on the wise feedback, wise framing for feedback. I can get these to you, Mary. These are actually links. I don't know if these links actually go to it. So using group activities and norms to help students come together. How you communicate with students, there's a fair amount of research on how this idea of communicating consistently and communicating the message we need to make is important. Using culturally relevant, and it comes back to the Devosian frame, like using culturally relevant communications with all of our students as we go through. Being cognizant of the fact that first-generation students don't understand everything that we talk about. So, and I'm going to depart here a bit, but the idea of when you talk about a syllabus with first-generation students, you may need to explain what a syllabus is. It sounds like a really practical, simple thing, but I have a lot of students I see a lot of students who are first-generation who are not entirely sure the difference between a schedule and a syllabus in a curriculum, because we throw the words around and they're not meaningful, particularly if you come to high school, sort of not been transparent in how they're getting taught. So we talk about this, that mindset interventions are most effective. So as you go through this, the most effective when they're targeted to the source, like who are you trying to get it to? They're tailored to the context. So in your circuits class versus in a math class or in an English class or in a history class, tailor it to the context, and then you measure it over time. You make sure that if you're not seeing results, that you make a change. So I think I want to stop, actually. This is, I think, mostly where I wanted to be. And I want to give a couple of minutes for questions. We've had some interaction, but I want to make sure I answer some of the questions before we go out. So that's a bit of an overview of sort of where we are at the system level in terms of both the mindset, how we're looking at these mindsets, where we are with the research agenda, largely based on sort of we're still looking to empathize and learn who our students are, and also to sort of, in spring 2019, the timeline is to start doing some rapid piloting of some interventions. Again, we're looking to adapt some things that have already been established by research into scaled settings. One of the challenges with everything, all the studies you've seen is the ends are generally under 100. So that's way too small for me to be confident that I can tell you this will work, particularly because they're so intensive. They have a great deal of professional development behind them to support them. And for effective intervention, the thing is really not, is missing here is it has to be scalable. It has to be able to affect every single incoming freshman. We have close to 50,000 incoming freshmen. We'd like to see them all across the system. We'd like to see them all get started off with a good start, and then a great number of them will need some support on their academic mindset. So with that, I want to stop. Thank you all again for it, recognizing that we have not touched the snacks, which I feel terrible about. But we'll take them back to Jean. Oh, by the way, Heather Collins is in the back. She had to step out when we started. So there are questions. And I'll admit that this is not entirely my area of expertise, so I may just simply punt the question to somebody else. But if I can't, I'll take the question back.
So what is the difference between self-efficacy and self-confidence?
So self-efficacy is a skill-based response, right? Self-efficacy is I feel I can do it. Self-confidence is a sense that I can do it. So it has, I'm not sure there's a technical difference, but if I'm looking at self-efficacy, I'm really worried about students sort of both connecting with skill and belief. Self-confidence strikes me as being belief without skill.
So how do you develop that? How do you really develop that in students so that they can achieve?
That's a good point. So it's actually one of the reasons why that's not on our list. Because I'm not sure there's a lot of evidence how malleable self-efficacy can be. We feel self-advocacy can be, but we also feel it's just good practice. Self-efficacy comes out of growth mindset. It's actually, if you think about it, self-efficacy builds on a growth mindset. Like I can change. But if you already have a great deal of confidence coming in, and yet you have no skill. So for instance, let me give you a good example. I play guitar at home. I am terrible. I am just awful. But I have a great deal of confidence that if I play louder, I'll be better, right? So I'm just playing along. So I have a great deal of self-confidence. I have very little self-efficacy. All right, my self-efficacy is uninformed by any actual belief in it. Because I know I should probably practice. But that seems like a lot of effort. I'm just going to keep on playing. But I think that's what we're looking at. Is you build from the idea of a growth mindset, because self-efficacy in and of itself is probably embedded in a lot of other thought processes. So that's as close, that's as deep as I can get into that. Your first.
One of the things that I'm worried about is that we're studying the USG as a whole, and this is an HBCU. There are legacies of systemic problems because of Georgia's past. That needs to be front and center. So I'm wondering if your data set and collection, because you are a nationwide organization, right?
No, we're the system office.
Oh, you're the system office. I'm sorry, I thought you were complete college and nonprofit.
No, complete college Georgia.
So, are you looking at, so again, my question will be amended. Are you looking at schools like, the schools we have something in common, like Morgan State or Norfolk State? I mean, are we looking at data sets with PWIs? I mean, students at Kennesaw State are drastically different than some of the challenges we face. So I think that needs to be taken into account.
Absolutely. So this is the big push. This is the big push for the mindset survey about why. So when we're pushing the mindset survey hard this year at all our institutions, so we have a data set large enough to really make this comparison. That's why I'm very excited about the fact that Savannah State has essentially knocked it out of the park. They've already exceeded the highest response rate from last year, and they're already done. And if a high response rate comes from all of our institutions, we can do really authentic comparisons. But what we can actually do is get data back to you for your students. So you don't. So the other thing I'll say is there are no other national data sets. We are literally on the frontier of this world. There is no one else. So there's Manesse and the Bessie, which are kind of like this, but they don't really get to the same depth. Georgia is the only state that surveys all of its freshmen for their academic mindset at the starting point. There's just no other data set to compare with nationally. So that's why we're so committed to getting a large pool from the state, because otherwise we can't make statistically significant decisions about
And will some of the decisions for the interventions that we're mentioning be context specific to the institutions themselves?
They'll be your decisions. I mean, so I'm looking. I'm actually sidelining to Michael Laney. Dr. Laney will get his data, or get y'all's data about your students, and be able to see where you sit, and then be able to make decisions about what do we need to, where are our levers, and where are our best opportunities. And that's not a thing. Like, it's not a secret message. I mean, this is data that we're having to share to a certain extent. I mean, there's some. It's anonymized. You won't see individual students, because at this point, what we're very concerned about is that we don't want this to be a predictive tool, right? You don't want to say, I found 5 kids who don't have grit. Let's move them out because we know they won't make it, right? We want to see what we can see in our students and see where our populations go. So it's absolutely going to be disaggregated by a whole bunch of factors. Poverty, race, geography if we can, like the idea of where do you come from. So a big risk of, particularly at a school like Savannah, a big risk you're going to face is you've got half your students come from way far away and half your students come from fairly close by, right? I mean, or some of your, a mix of your students. So your residential students who are nearby and your residential students who are far away have very different senses of connectivity, belonging, and homesickness. And those are really important things to consider. So that may be something that at your institution you want to crack open and take a look at, right? So, yeah, thanks for the question. It's really important, but I also want to emphasize nobody else in the country has done this yet. So we are really stepping into terra incognita. There's no, the Bessie and Nessie don't break down on this. They don't have the degree of detail on this. So this degree to which, particularly you guys who are teaching first-year experience courses can boost up the numbers of respondents will be the degree to which we're able to really make some good conclusions about what we see in our system. Yeah.
Yeah, our advisory community is here today, and I want to recognize them, our advising with the Student for, the Center for Student Academic Success and our A2S, the directors and the advisory staff are here. So I wondered if you had any comments to, that are really germane to advisement as we go forward with our momentum year theme with the Office of Advisement to help our advisors, really tease out some of the tensions that you talked about today.
And where am I looking? Am I looking over here? Did they put you all at one table or they I was wondering if they got if they were placed at a table. It's an interesting question because so my thought on that is actually that your advisors and my experience with advisors is advisors tend to be the advanced scout for student trouble. They tend to be people who have a different relationship with faculty and they're able to they're a critical point actually going back to the academic affairs side of the house to say we have a problem with communications with our students. We have students who are unable to access. Good example. If advisors are noting that students are not responding to alerts to say you need to check with the advisor or with the student, you may end up discovering that part of that is about power and a power dynamic between students and faculty. And it may be necessary to then say, how do we change the power dynamic between faculty and students so that students can feel that faculty can be approached and faculty can still maintain their role as instructional staff. And I'm going to give you an example that I trot out almost every place I go. Is that if you have office hours and they are mandatory office hours, that some of those office hours be held in places where the students are publicly walking around. Tutoring centers, libraries, residence life is kind of dicey at times, but somewhere where a student's going to feel comfortable. The idea being that some students will not feel comfortable going into a room with a desk in front of it, and others will want that private conversation, but there's that. But I would use your advising team as a scout team. The other thing is, social belonging often begins with the advisor, and purpose begins with the advisor. So if, to the extent that the advisory board has the opportunity to have a conversation, connect a personal goal and expectation with what the academic elements of Savannah State offer. So connecting that academic program to their career goals and their life goals, and also helping them to parse out what's realistic. Because I think part of the problem is that students don't feel like they have a way to communicate their uncertainty. Someone's saying a law degree takes 7 years. That idea that students may not know what they don't know, but if I'm discovering that I'm going to be in school for 7 years, and by God, I don't really want to do 7 years, what else would that look like? That's an advisor's conversation first and foremost, because oftentimes those are the people they're most familiar with. And I really appreciate the fact that we've expanded what happens in advising. And I want to be honest about the fact that a lot of this work that we've done in years past has not happened without the work of advisors. So we value that. We value that tremendously. So thank you for that segue. Appreciate it. Well, I'll keep talking. I'll also be here afterwards, but I want to be respectful of the fact that you guys probably want to walk across in it's about what, 90 now? 90 and get a nice leisurely stroll over to your lunch. So again, thank you so much. I'm gonna, if you want, Mary obviously has my email, but I will put up. Got nothing.
Are there any other questions? lunch and eat wherever you choose to.
I want to take this opportunity on behalf of the president to thank Mr. Collins Mr. Hall and Ms. Collins. for
This happens
coming
all
down,
the time.
From the USG on behalf of the president. And I want to thank you for being here to be a part of this conversation. Dean Kropnicki, Dr. MGM, thanks for setting this up. This is just the first iteration of a series of conversations that we're going to be having as we're rolling out Momentum Year, because there are many pieces to this. And if you recall, when we had the assembly, I showed that building, looked like the Acropolis, if you will, in Complete College, Georgia, and I shared the pillars, and I shared the roof that's under, which is Momentum Year. And academic mindset is a component of that. Not just the mindset of the student, but it's our mindset as well as faculty and staff. There's mindset as far as that student. There's mindset as far as the student's parents and the community that they come from. And so what we're working towards is that we're working toward developing a growth mindset for all of us. Because we all have some level of implicit bias in terms of forming mindsets where we even say, but you don't know our students. Okay? You don't know our students, or you don't know my community, or whatnot. Therefore, what you're saying is not generalizable to my population. That speaks to mindset as well. There's some data, but that also speaks to mindset as well. We have to work with the students that we have. I keep saying that. We don't have the opportunity or the luxury of turning these students away. The students that choose to come to Savannah State are our students. And we have to work with the students that we have, and we have to help those students to be successful. Recognizing the mindsets that they have, and recognizing the mindsets that we have as well. And so I hope that this started the conversation where we begin to address our mindsets, the mindsets that the students have. And one of the things that I just pulled out of what you were saying, Jonathan, is how do I affirm that student? And let them know that I am partnering with them and I believe in them. I think that's the most powerful thing that we can say as we are working with our students. I know this is hard, but I believe in you. You made it to college. So I believe in you, and you have the potential to do this work. Okay? Our words have so much power. And the roles and positions that we hold empower people, or they cripple people. We can either empower them or we cripple them. You may say, well, Dr. Laney, it's about reality. I'm not denying the reality, but I'm also not denying the power that you have as a faculty member, as an advisor, to speak into the life of that student from a mindset, a growth mindset. Yes, this is hard, but you can do this. You graduated from high school. You're here in college. We will work with you. We believe in you. And I've been guilty of the things that you were talking about. I was saying, ouch, ouchalula, okay? Because I've got, and I still carry the red pen. I've got the red pen, and I do the edits, and verb tense agreement, and passive voice. And I forget sometimes to say, but you can do it, and I believe in you. And I believe in you. And when I got a hold of that, and I had a powerful conversation once with a student when I was working in Kenya. And that student really made me feel, convicted me. Because what I said, I won't even say it because people are probably taping me. They are taping. So I won't even say what I said to that student in frustration. Okay, because it didn't seem to be going anywhere, and the student wasn't doing well. And I wrote some stuff in red, and I got some stuff off my chest. Okay? Maybe you've never been there, and, I hope you're never in that place. But I was in that place through confession, and I said some things on there that I regret, and the student checked me on it. He checked me on it. And that was a powerful lesson for me. Okay, that was a powerful lesson for me. Okay? And so I have moved into this area of growth mindset, obviously. Okay? If you do any mentoring, you know about the power of growth mindset. How many of you do mentoring? You know that mentoring is about growth mindset. It's tough love, but it's also about growth mindset. Okay? So it's not rocket science, and while some of the areas are still being explored, it's an area that we are on the vanguard here at Savannah State, because we're one of those vanguard institutions that I shared with you in the USG under Lumina with HIPS, that we are, and we're the only HBCU that's in that vanguard for the Nash HIPS, okay, project. And I'm excited, I'm very excited about that. So I commend you on being here. I commend you on the work that you are doing. We believe in you. We believe in you. And we believe that maybe if you weren't as active in your mindset as possible, that you can change too. That we are lifelong learners, right? And so we can all change. We can all continue to grow. The other piece I want to address is, and this is, I don't know, it may have been addressed, and if I'm being redundant, then forgive me. I have seen and I have heard comments about the challenges of cross-cultural communication. Cross-cultural communication, an academic mindset based on the cross-cultural lens. Okay? We have a very diverse faculty. We are blessed to have a very diverse faculty, a global faculty at Savannah State University. But many of our students are not coming from a global paradigm. They are interacting for the very first time with a person whose first language is not English. And that is a challenge for them. And they're not necessarily comfortable working through it. I'm going to be honest with you. Because they bring their biases and they bring their prejudice with them. And when they hear or interact with a person who has an accent, their first response is, I want somebody who speaks English the way I'm used to hearing. And we've got to work through that. We've got to have an honest conversation about that. Because we have a responsibility to prepare our students to be global learners. And to work in a global world where everybody doesn't look like them, speak like them, or interact like they do. But that is out there. That's the elephant in the room, oftentimes. When students will interact with me and say, well, you don't know Dr. So-and-so. I don't understand what she's saying. I don't understand what he's saying. And what they're saying is, I don't want to deal with this. Now, Dr. So-and-so may react to that. It's only natural when people are pushing back against us, so we react to that. Okay? But there has to be a conversation on both sides where we have to work through this. Okay? Where we have to work through our implicit bias. And maybe some of it's not even implicit for some cases. It's out there. And so I'm willing to talk about it. Because we have to talk about it. That's where we have to dialogue. And it's through dialogue that we begin to promote a growth mindset. Okay? So we have literature available. We're going to have more forums and brown bags where we talk about this. But we have to help our students become global learners and work in a diverse world. Some of our students, this will be the first time they have interacted with somebody and comes from a different culture and a different place. And they're not comfortable with it. In fact, they will tell you, I came to HBCU because I only want to be with people who look like me. Well, the world does not look like Savannah State in the sense of it's only an HBCU. You know, it doesn't look that way. And so we have to prepare them for the global world. Did you have something you want to say,
I
Dean?
just want to add also that the faculty themselves need to have faculty development on how to deal with the students, because that is a lot of the problems that we're facing over here. is that I come from a certain culture that I'm trying to impose it on the culture over here to the classroom, and that creates a conflict between the student and the faculty. So really, even the faculty need to have that opportunity, and all of us who graduated from PhDs, none of us have any training on how to become an educator. That's a reality.
Good point, good point. So my own implicit bias that I may have as a researcher coming on R1, but I am not in education. I don't have an EDD, I have a PhD, and I'm a social scientist, but I didn't teach, I did take a couple of education courses, but typically we don't take education courses in pedagogy, and so we teach the way we were taught, right? The other piece, of course, as you mentioned, is that if you're coming from a worldview or your culture, you teach and you operate through that lens and that worldview. Maybe social stratification. I had the opportunity to work in Kenya where it was highly stratified. I am the professor, essentially I am God. And you're the student and you are not God, okay? I am God, you are not. And it's Darwinian, survival of the fittest. And if you can't hack it, pack it. Because there are 1,000 other students waiting to take your seat in Nairobi, Kenya. But this is not Nairobi, Kenya. This is not the University of Kenya. And we don't have 1,000 other students waiting to take that seat when they can't hack it in your class. There is no waiting list. There is no waiting list. So we have to work through that and recognize where you came from, but as they used to say, but you in America now. So, Heather, thank you for being here. Thank you for the work you do. Jonathan, thank you for being here. Thank you for the work that you do. And thank you for having the conversations. Continue to have these conversations. We're going to address this issue because it is real. And it's tough. This is hard work. But if we do this hard work, I believe at the end of the day, our students are going to feel a sense of belonging, which is part of mindset. They're going to feel connected. And when they feel connected, they're going to be retained. They're going to do better in your classes, and they're going to graduate. Final story. When I went to my first PWI, I happened to have the pleasure for me of meeting my first African American faculty member. I had never seen an African American with a PhD. I didn't even know they made them. This was in the 70s. And he was the first person who told me that I was smart, beside my mother. Because all my counselors and teachers in high school told me I was dumb. Told me I should go to a community college. Told me I should go to Voc Tech. But he told me, he spoke those words, I believe in you. And although I wasn't a sociology major, I took every class that man had because he was affirming me. I was getting something that I needed. And that kept me at the University of Massachusetts. One person kept me at the University of Massachusetts because he said, Michael, I believe in you. Just think of the power you have when you speak that into the lives of your students. That's what Mindset's all about. Enjoy your lunch on me. Have a great day. Thank you.